Hi there, welcome to this build of a 45-inch wingspan Quiver. Now the Quiver is a scaled down version of the late 1930s iconic Quaker. We're building this Quiver from a great set of plans which you can download for free from the OuterZone website, and there'll be a link in the description below this video to those plans. Well, we're almost finished with this Quiver now. There's very little to do, and one of the final things, because we've got the fuselage finished in the last video, we got the radio gear fitted, and really the final thing before we cover this is to get the dashboard and the windscreen fitted. So we're going to, first of all, obviously we need to put the dashboard in and a little bit of timber around the front here, and then we're going to make a custom dashboard out of a sheet of acetate. So the first thing that we've got to do, we need to have a piece of balsa at an angle like that, which I guess will be the dashboard, and we need to cut that around to follow the profile of the nose of this plane. And then once we've got that piece of balsa in place, we'll have a couple of gaps either side. It'll meet at the top here. But what we need to do is those gaps, we need to just fill that in with a nice piece of flexible balsa over the top. I thought it'd be useful to show you what I've done so far. You can see I've got the dashboard in there, and I've got a little bit of support balsa glued to the firewall. This isn't glued in yet, but that is. And I just glued it onto the firewall, and then I sanded it to the right shape. When I glued it on, I made sure that the top, this section here, was the correct depth for the balsa I was going to use to go on the top, like that. So then we've got this dashboard that will just go on there, and that's the correct angle. And to get that angle right on this piece, I just eyed up using those corners and a sanding stick and just sanded it until it became the same angle it would need to be to meet these corners. I hope that makes sense. So now that just fits on there nicely, like that. The home stretch with this dashboard. We've got the dashboard now glued on, and I've used a file just to go around and put a flat top on that to take off the kind of the corner of the dashboard. And so we can see now that's quite flat across the top there. And what we're going to do is, I've got this strip of 3/32 balsa, 2.4mm balsa, and I'm going to glue that, because the bottom of the dashboard here is inset from this piece of 3/16. So I'm going to glue that like that with a piece of, with some thin CA. I'm then going to gradually roll this around. I'll probably get to the centre, and I will glue it, and then I will keep going round. And when I glue it, I won't only glue it here, but I'll glue it on the underside of this, and I will roll it right round until I get to this side, and there'll be a little bit just sticking out like that. And what I'll do is I'll bend this down, I will mark it, cut it, file it so it just tucks in. I'd rather cut it in situ just at the last minute than kind of trying to measure it up now and then putting it in and finding it's too short. So I will get this glued now. Right, we've now got this cover glued on and all the way around. Still needs a lot of cleaning up, but the next job is to just go around with a scalpel and to trim off the excess, the overhang. But we need to be careful that we don't go too far, because we don't want to damage the dashboard underneath. And I would suggest that the very last bit we do by sanding it. But you can see now that's coming off, and it's going to look like a nice dashboard once it's done. So there we go, just like peeling an apple. But obviously a nice sharp scalpel is what's what's needed. So I'll get this cleaned up and then we'll have a look at doing the windscreen. Right, well, I've now got that balsa around the dashboard, profiled, lovely and smooth. It may occur to some, why did I put 3/32 balsa on there when I could have got away with 1/16, something a lot thinner and a lot lighter? Well, it's only a small piece, so the weight won't really make a difference. But I knew that when I glued that on, I wouldn't be able to get it lovely and flat and in line with the rest of the nose. So I wanted to have a good thickness there so that I could sand it and profile it and get a really nice profile on it without worrying I was going to thin it down too much. Right, well, now we've got that done, what we need to do is to make an acetate windscreen. And well, I'll show you the acetate that I'm going to use first. I'm going to be using this, so it's classed as extra thick, but it's only 240 micron, so it's actually quite thin. It's a kind of things you cover documents with. It's really nice stuff. It's just the right thickness for this. It's flexible but strong, and it's lovely and clear, and it bends lovely, as you can see. But first, before we use the acetate, we need to make up a template out of cardboard, something, or a thin card. I'm going to use this thin card, and we need something that we can put around, we can adapt, we can modify, we can stick bits to until we've got the final template sorted. And before we do that template, which is obviously going to cover the windscreen that comes around the front here, but we need to decide how far back we're going to come. We could come just to this pillar here, but that's quite thin. It's just after a curve, and I think that'd be quite difficult to glue. So I'm going to bring it back to this thicker doubled up pillar. So we'll bring it all the way around and then we'll bring it down to there, and we'll glue it half on that pillar, so halfway across, and then the rest of these windows can come up and glue on the other half, and we won't have a step joint, there'll be a butt joint. So to make this windscreen, first thing we're going to do is cut ourselves a bit of cardboard that we can wrap round, and we'll be quite generous, hopefully we'll be quite generous with the size of this. And what we need to do, I've got some tape here which we'll probably need in a minute. We need to decide whereabout, I'll just zoom in just a little bit. Okay, we need to decide whereabout we come on the front of the nose here, and I think what we will do is just bring it around and just to the edge of the firewall there. You can see the join in the firewall, and we'll bring that around like that, and as I said, around to this pillar. So the first thing I think we're going to do is pull that around nice and tight, and you can see it goes against the top here of the cabin that we just rounded off to take that windscreen. Now what I'm going to do at this stage is I'm going to, having wrapped that round, I'm just going to draw a line along this this piece of balsa here, this longeron. I'm not sure it's a longeron, but anyway, to there. And I'm going to mark on here where that vertical piece is coming up. I'm going to draw around the inside and also the inside here. It's one of these jobs, one of many jobs where you feel like you could do with about 6 hands. Now I'm just going to do that side, and then we need to come up like that, and we need to come across from there to there. Right, now hopefully if we cut this out we should have our windscreen, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to be a little bit generous at the moment just in case we judged that wrong. So we've got our pencil line here for that one, and I'm going to leave probably about a 3/16 on, which we'll trim off if it starts to look right, because there's no point in trimming it to the size and then finding actually we've got it slightly wrong. Much better to take stuff off if necessary. I mean, we can always stick bits on, we've got some tape and it's easy done, but we'll do it like this. There we have our first attempt at a template. So let's just see how this fits. And actually that is fitting pretty well. And I think we are probably almost there with that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to trim it up to those lines because they look as if they were probably correct, more or less. And then we can glue it into place. If we bring that around so it fits nicely on this side here, we can then bring it around. That's a little bit short there. Now, so we may have taken too much off. Let's just have another go at fitting this. Right, well, I've now got this taped into place and it actually fits around the front really nicely. It's sealed along the top there, will glue on lovely, goes along the nose really nicely. Where it doesn't fit is along the bottom here. So what we need to do is we need to mark up where we need to cut a bit off along here. We've got a little bit to cut off around the top, and I will probably just take off a slither on the front as well. But we need to add some on as well. We need to put on a piece about there. So I'm going to, that's where we want to come to. We don't come to there. So I'm just going to stick this on with some tape. I find it easier to do it that way than to take this off and try and just add a little bit on. So we put that to where we want it to come to, and we'll just stick on there. That's what we've got, and then we'll cut that off. And I need to do the same on the other side here. I need to add a little bit there and a little bit there. Right, well, now using this template with extra bits stuck on, we've got a final template which fits really, really nicely. You can see it's just where we want it here, halfway across those two struts. It's level with the bottom of the strut there, lovely and tight around here. We've got it nice and tight around the top of the cabin, and on this side again, perfect fit. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut this out of acetate now, and then we'll get it glued on. There's one more thing we need to do though before we glue it on, and we'll have a look at that in a second. Now, cutting out acetate can be a little bit of a slippery job if you've got a template that you're holding on top of it. So what I'm doing is I'm just putting on a couple of pieces of tape to hold this template so it doesn't move. And now I can cut these edges and then just cut those bits last with the tape, and it will cut through the tape and we won't have any of it on our final windscreen. And of course a nice sharp scalpel blade, and we should be able to do that quite nicely. Right, I've now got the acetate windscreen cut out and just roughly held on with a couple of pieces of tape just to check it fits, and it does, and we're almost ready to glue this on. But we need to think ahead here, and if we want to paint the dashboard or to colour the dashboard, we need to do that now, because trying to get a brush into there is going to be really hard, and we're going to get it on the windscreen. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run a light pencil line around here, and I'm going to take off the windscreen, and now I'm going to paint the dashboard up to that line. So you can see the line on there hopefully, and I'm just going to paint around to that on the inside so we don't need to worry about that afterwards. And then the tissue that we use for covering will come up to that line, so we won't see any of the bare balsa. Now to paint this, I'm going to be using a matte black, and I'm just using a tester pot here which is designed for house ceilings, walls, and this is just an emulsion paint just from a local DIY store. And I've used this in the past and it works really nicely, and I'm going to use this to paint the whole inside of the cabin, all of the areas that can be seen through the windows, just to darken it down and make it look a little bit nicer. But I want to be really careful not to get it on these outside edges, because it will show through the tissue when we finally get it covered. So I'll get on and paint that now, and then we'll have a look at how we're going to stick this windscreen on. Right, we're ready to put the canopy on now. We've got this all painted up. I've done a good job around the dashboard and the top of the windscreen. Inside it might need a little bit more touching up in places, but essentially we're ready to put the windscreen on. I'm going to glue it with this canopy glue, with this Formula 560. I think now this might be done by Zap, so it's a different label. I'm not sure. I've had this quite a long time. I've used it a few times. I really like it. It sticks really nice. Now, to glue this on, I've had a dry run, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the glue on the side of the fuselage here on the bare wood, and I'm going to stick that on, and then I'm going to use some tape. I've got my Scotch Magic tape, and I'm just going to put a piece around there and around here to hold that nice. In fact, I could put a piece on the top, so that will hold it fairly secure. I'm then going to put the glue on, actually no, I'm not going to glue that bit. I'm going to glue around the top here, and I'm going to glue that side, and then I will pull it round and I will tape it again. Now at this point it's still going to be bulging off a little bit. It's not going to be ideal, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a piece of plastic over and then a piece of balsa, and the same on this side, piece of balsa, piece of plastic, and then I am going to clamp it. So these pieces of balsa will actually hold it nice and flat against the side of the fuselage here, and we should get a really good adhesion. So I will get on and do this now. Famous last words. It should go fairly well, hopefully. Right, I've got this all held in place now and clamped up. Hopefully my bits of balsa on the side won't stick to the canopy because we've got this bit of plastic in between. I've got some tape pulling the windscreen against the balsa on the top here. There's no gap along the bottom, so all we can do now is leave this and hope that we've got it right. Right, well, I've got the clamps and the tape off the windscreen, and it's gone on lovely. Couldn't have looked nicer. I'm really pleased with how it's looking. So now there is just two last jobs to do. We've got the wing dowel that we need to be able to put in, but we need to put a hole in the windscreen first. So what I'm going to do is just push that through and line it up with the front of the windscreen where it needs to go, and I'm going to use my fine point soldering iron, and I'm going to carefully and nervously just burn a little round hole in the windscreen so that that will poke through really nice and snug. Once that's poked through, I'm going to mix up some 30-minute epoxy, and I'm going to use a cocktail stick, and I'm going to very carefully with the point of the cocktail stick just put the epoxy around the dowel and also around the base of the windscreen here, so it just comes up onto the windscreen and onto the balsa, and that will just help form a seal. I mean, it's pretty solid anyway and doesn't need it for strength particularly. I'm thinking of the oil that's going to come to here. So we're going to put that bead of epoxy round, and then when we come to cover this, the tissue will come up and just lap up the epoxy, so it should seal really nice round here. I've done that on other vintage models and it produces a really nice result. So once my soldering iron is up to temperature, I will get this hole burnt in. Let's hope that goes okay. Right, I've just burnt the hole in this, and I thought I would just show you what I'd done. It's important, I think, to keep wiping the soldering iron to get the burnt plastic off while you're doing this, and just to do a little bit at a time. And if you really need to, any bits that are sticking out a lot, you can just skim off very carefully with a sharp scalpel. But if it's a little bit rough, that doesn't really matter, because the epoxy, it'll just help the epoxy sort of hold on to the windscreen when it's glued. So you can see now that's sticking through, so I'm going to not only glue that, but I will glue the actual piece of wood in place in the fuselage, and then I'm going to get round and do the epoxy on the base of the windscreen. Right, I've now got the epoxy around this dowel here coming out, and that's dried and it's set really nicely. It hasn't gone much onto the windscreen, but just enough that it will seal all around there. And I kind of moved it up so the windscreen was horizontal when it was dry, and a little bit has flowed through, so the windscreen shouldn't move by pressing it in or by coming out now. It should be well secure. Incidentally, there's a few little bits of tackiness on the screen in places where the tape was. That magic tape, when I took it off, just left a little bit of a sticky residue, just a little bit in places, but you can't notice it unless you really look for it. And to be honest, once we get the oil and the fuel on it, it will soon come off. I did try with 95% alcohol, but it didn't want to move. So, but like I say, it's only a little bit. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to put a bead of epoxy around the base of the windscreen, and we can just have a look at that. So I've got some epoxy mixed up here, and I'm just putting it on the end of this cocktail stick, and then I'm just going to go round and very carefully just lay that at the bottom there. Doesn't want to be much, because we don't want it running and going on the screen. We just want it to hold the bottom of that acetate there and against the balsa. And we are going to cover this bottom of the windscreen probably with just a little bit of tissue. I've now got that epoxy on, and you can see just a very small bead around the bottom of the windscreen on the balsa and the actual acetate itself. And once that's dry, that should be great. Now you can see I haven't blackened this, I didn't darken it down. Kind of ummed as whether I should do. Maybe I should, but I think what I'm going to do is just fuel proof it, which will darken it down a little bit, but I didn't want to make it black like the rest of the inside of the cockpit. So I don't know whether that was the right choice or not, but it is what it is. Well, we've now got the windscreen glued in, and of course the dashboard finished, all painted up. We've got the dowel in for the elastic bands to hold the wings on, and I'm really pleased with how it's looking and how it's gone. There's still a few little jobs just to touch up some of the black here and there, but essentially we've got this finished now, and I'm going to draw this video to a close. And I can't wait now to move on to the next stage in getting this model finished. And I think probably the next thing I'm going to be doing is painting inside the engine bay and doing some fuel proofing. And essentially that will be the last thing, probably. I can't think of anything else we'll then need to do other than get this thing covered. And we're going to be putting on the laminating film and the lovely Japanese tissue, just the same way as we did with the wings and the tailplane, and I can't wait to start that process. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and thanks very much for watching, and please come back and see how we get on in the final stages of drawing this lovely 45-inch wingspan quiver together, ready for the airfield.